Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao. I'm the founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the first Read for Pixels panel in a series of live stream panel sessions with the authors and editors of our brand new charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. And it is held as part of the launch of this anthology. This anthology is part of our Read for Pixels program, through which we work with award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness and funds for our work to end violence against women and girls. And Lee Murray, who is one of today's panelists and one of the authors in the anthology, is actually holding up the book. Isn't it gorgeous? Yay! Today's YouTube session is also our sixth Read for Pixels live stream author panel. The Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. And what better topic to kick off our anthology panel session series than The Twilight Zone Meets Promising Young Woman, Storytelling and Justice for Women in Speculative Fiction. So here to participate in this discussion today are three award-winning best-selling speculative fiction authors who have all contributed wonderfully spine-chilling and thought-provoking stories to our anthology. So we're going in alphabetical order now. Dana Cameron's work. Dana is right underneath me on the screen. Dana Cameron's work has won multiple Agatha, Anthony, and McCavity Awards and earned an Edgar Award nomination. Her Emma Fielding archaeology mysteries were adapted by Hallmark Movies and Mysteries, and she currently writes the urban fantasy Fangborn novels. Lee Murray is a multi-award winning author and editor from New Zealand. And as an author, her work includes military thrillers and supernatural crime noir series. She has also co-edited Black Cranes, Tales of Unquiet Women, which recently won, is it Shirley Jackson Award or Bram Stoker?
Mm-hmm.
Shirley
Jackson. Both.
Oh, excellent. Right, so both a Shirley Jackson Award and a Bram Stoker Award. And we also have Nisi Shawl. Nisi is a multiple award-winning science fiction and fantasy author and editor who has taught for Clarion West, Viable Paradise, Centrum, and Hugo House, and spoken at Duke University and Spelman College. They co-wrote Writing the Other, A Practical Approach, a standard text on inclusive representation. So I'm going to put a banner right now. So if you just joined us, we are talking about storytelling and justice for women in speculative fiction today. And you, the audience, will also be able to ask Nisi, Dana, and Lee questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type in your questions to the chat box on the right of the YouTube screen, and Anusha Kandasivam, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Dana, Nisi, and Lee to answer. And for those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due, you can order it from all major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. And all net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's work alive and kicking. So now onwards to the panel session. So we're just going to give you a quick introduction to provide some context to what we're discussing today. So storytelling is one of the most important parts of culture. So folktales, fables, legends, anecdotes, and even gossip have been used to teach the past knowledge and to preserve culture from generation to generation, first in oral form, then later in written and printed form. And over the years, from the invention of the printing press right down to the birth of the internet, it has become progressively easier for stories to not just be handed down within a culture, but also to reach a wider community, a nation, and now the world. So from Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, to Rod Serling, creator of The Twilight Zone, speculative fiction, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, or horror, has been used as a vehicle for critiquing social, moral, and ethical issues of the day. And with violence against women being a widespread human rights issue that's now being increasingly openly addressed by society, pop culture is starting to reflect this in the stories that it tells. From the critically acclaimed Promising Young Woman to best-selling fantasy books such as Anne Bishop's The Courtyard of the Other series, the emphasis now is not just on revenge, but on justice for abused women and consequences for abusive men. With that in mind, today's panel session will be discussing whether storytelling through speculative fiction can be an effective tool for helping push for justice for women and girls in the battle to end gender-based violence worldwide. Now, here let's begin. Ever since Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, a book which many consider the start of modern English language speculative fiction, authors and creators have used storytelling for critiquing and presenting important social issues and current affairs. Yet the inclusion of the critique of the intertwined issues of sexism, misogyny, and violence against women in speculative fiction seems to be a far more recent development. Do you think this is the case? And if so, why do you think this has happened? And let's start with Nisi.
I actually think that it's been around. It's always been there. It's just that our ideas of what constitutes justice have been changing, and that these are presented. When you're writing science fiction or speculative fiction of any sort, you're writing about not the future, but the time that you're in. And so as the concept evolves, the stories change. With this in mind, the first thing that I saw that really made me believe in justice for women was a book by Gwyneth Jones called The White Queen, which does a lot of amazing things. The premise is that these characters, these aliens, come and are basically it's imperialism in reverse. It's aliens colonizing the earth. But one of the things that the aliens keep talking about that at first the humans just don't understand is the war against women. And then they really come to see, well, yes, actually the statistics back this up. You know, the casualties go this way. The injuries, the poverty, the deaths are all can be seen as casualties in a war. And so by using science fiction to put that idea in someone else's mind, in the alien mindset, I think that was a big step towards speculative fiction contributing to justice for women.
Okay, Lee?
Wow, I could listen to Nisi all day. Just fascinating. Yeah, I think that speculative fiction definitely has a role in it. Has evolved over. It evolves over time, doesn't it? Storytelling evolves according to. It reflects society as we live it, as Nisi so clearly said, and therefore it is evolving. And so if we even think about early fairy tales, which are a form of speculative fiction, they are very much set out to put women in their place and set out the expectations for women. So for example, Little Red Riding Hood, we must not step off the path or else we'll be consumed by the wolf, you know. And so they do tend to keep women in their place. And now, of course, speculative writers are revisiting these stories and reimagining them and giving us new stories as women gain more power and representation, and we're getting stories that represent the way we are thinking now, which I think is wonderful. And if I think about the Pixels project and Nisi's story, which I think is actually a retelling, if you like, of the Rapunzel story, with a speculative take on, the hair going down the tower. I think that is a new way of addressing violence against women in a way that offers hope and representation and authenticity. So I think, yes, that there's definitely, that it's always been there, but I think it's evolving now to reflect modern society.
Yeah.
Dina?
Yeah, I think I really like Nisi's point about the use of speculative fiction as a distancing thing. You get a different perspective if you have it set in a slightly different context than you're expecting. It's much easier to talk about things that might be challenging if it's set in a fantastic universe, or that couldn't possibly be here. And like, oh, wait. And I think that's why you start to see things like how subversive Star Trek was when that first came out, for example. And I think Lee's point about the evolution is very well taken, because I was thinking about Mary Shelley's book, and it's amazing, and it's so important to so many different genres because of the way it allows us to look at big subjects like what's the relationship between God and man, and when does that get out of balance, and that sort of thing, and scientific ethics. But I think at that point it was the women writing, and the women writing's fantastic fiction, of course, but I think that one was being received as a philosophical piece. And it's as things go on, you have the transition of women, say, from prizes or victims or demons into actually having voices as characters. I'm thinking about the recent resurgence. We discussed fairy tales to begin with, but there's also the retelling of Ulysses from Circe's point of view. And I love that so much. I love the idea of looking at, Grendel's mother. John Gardner did that a million years ago. Well, not a million years ago, but you all know what I mean. And it's the idea of flipping those things around and finding what the women might have had to say about themselves, the situation they were found in, that I find so powerful. And it's recently, it's been terrific for me. I've been rereading. I mentioned Circe, and I'm afraid I can't remember the author, but also reading translations.
Madeline Miller?
Sorry?
I think it's Circe. Isn't it Madeline Miller?
I think you're right, because she also did. I think was it Achilles as well, or
Yeah, she did Achilles as well.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of a translation by Maria Headley of Beowulf.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. So I think as we go back into these stories that have been designed to sort of keep women in place or on a specific path, or not to think outside of certain bounds, going back and reinvesting those characters with voices and agency is so much fun, and it's so powerful. And it's a very exciting time to be a speculative fiction writer, to be able to play with these ideas. Like, hey, let's have another look at this. Let's look at this from a slightly different angle, one you might not have considered before. And I think it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So we set the scene. So let's talk about, we're all going to talk about what's happening today. So the issue of violence against women has historically been seen as taboo for public discussion, especially domestic violence, rape, and sexual assault. It's just part of the fabric, but people never talk about it, which is why many advocates and activists talk about the wall of silence around the violence. Yet in pop culture, violence against women has been a staple part of the stories being told, whether it takes the form of the refrigerated woman trope, where a woman's rape or murder is used to motivate a male protagonist, or it is used for shock value in certain TV shows to boost newer interests. So, how can speculative fiction counteract stories and storytelling tropes in pop culture that normalize violence against women to the point of glorifying it as entertainment for the masses? Nisi?
Well, the first thing to do would be to decenter it by making it not about the effect that it has on the man. I mean, that's how you get away from like the fridging of the woman or whatever. I've actually seen this done very well in several instances. Again, I'll go to television for this one. I'm a massive Outlander fan. And there are many rapes in that series. In one of them, the hero's daughter is raped, and he's starting to get all upset about it. And she says, "No, you don't get to be upset about that. This happened to me. You know, this is my story. You are not a part of this equation." Yeah. So that would be my first thing that you would go to. And another thing would be not to normalize it, but to show that it is business as usual. To show that it's part of a larger whole.
Yeah. Lee?
Yeah, I think what I would like to see, and I agree entirely with what Nisi has said there, is so much of these stories are focused around, do we believe what a woman says? And like the first or third or 2/3 of the story is, do we believe what she says? And if we want to get around the problem of women's stories not being told and this wall of silence, we actually have to start listening to women when they speak. And why does you have to have 30 women speak before, and it's 30 women against one man's voice? I just find that, so we need to stop doing that in our stories. We need to not discuss whether or not she should be believed. I think that is part of the issue, and that came out very clearly in Dana's story, which she sets in The Kindly Sea, which is in the Pixel Project anthology, and she sets it fantastically for me. It really resonated in the academic environment where women have lots of power. They're in lots of positions of power, and yet they still do not have a voice, and it takes 30 or 40 or 50 women to say something before something is done. And it's not that we don't speak, it's that we're not heard. And I think that is part of the issue. And I think that seems to be a big focus in popular fiction, is that a woman should not be believed. And Nisi does it in their story in a very clever way, with a symbol, by making the women, the story it's an epistolatory story, and they use very cleverly invisible ink to tell the story, and that just sort of epitomizes the fact that women don't have a voice. We're silenced in so many ways, and so the people who need to tell the story are silenced. And that's where the wall is. So we need to get over that issue in these popular stories. We need to focus not on the silence, but actually the story.
Dana?
I think that getting past that, a lot of it has to do with the representation of strong female characters. As you said, the daughter in Outlander is like, this is my situation. This is my thing to deal with. This is not for you to get puffed up. I loved that scene. I thought that was fabulous. I also liked when he fainted when.
Yes.
Yeah, when his wife returned and he faints, I'm like, I can't do that. But I think it's showing strong female characters, and strength comes in a lot of ways. It can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be endurance, it can be speaking up. And I think that and we get that in little pieces, and that's what helps us grow to get past that speaking out thing. It's taking me this long to find my voice. I didn't start writing fiction until 20 years ago, and that was incredibly difficult for me. And part of it was thinking, well, who am I to write something that isn't, I'm not documenting for someone else. As an archaeologist, that's where my background was. I was speculating about these people, and I was always trying to be inclusive at that, but who am I to write something made up? Who am I to give voice to something that isn't even true or isn't even real? It's true. It's just not real. So I think that representation matters. I think that showing different kinds of strength, moving away from, and I hate the expression, was it kick-ass female protagonists? She's got, and God bless the trend, because it allowed people to start thinking about, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if we're going to go back to television, and a bunch of other shows, young women who were standing up for themselves, not always perfectly, but they were. And I think those all eat away at that reticence to talk about things. If we have things in popular culture, we can use them to talk about our own lives. And I have to say that the idea of refrigerating women, I love the fact that Ryan Reynolds was called out for that for the Deadpool movies, because recently he's working on a third one, but he did a series of promotions for other Marvel things, and he says, oh, right there, what they were doing there, that's called refrigerating the woman. That's not good. You shouldn't do that. I'm working on it. And I'm like, yes, we Ryan Reynolds heard, and is now giving, is now thinking about these things. He's like, I never heard of that before. But I love the fact that Deadpool is pointing this out, that we shouldn't be using women as the motivation for the man. It should be the women and their motivations and what they do with it. I thought that was fabulous.
And that's the important thing, isn't it? That's the important thing, that Ryan Reynolds listened.
Mm-hmm.
He heard.
Yep.
When so many male producers, male authors, male editors, it's like we're shouting in the void. I don't know how you feel. I mean, Nisi's non-binary, and the rest of us are female, and sometimes it feels like we're shouting into the void. Like everything just goes into this big black hole, and no one's listening, even though they're standing there. Yeah, and
I was also going to say, also going back to Outlander and what you were saying, Lee. The thing I love is that the hero believes the heroine. Like her own husband doesn't even believe, when she has all this physical evidence of what's been going on. But, Jamie just believes.
Yep.
Okay.
Gotta hear it, gotta believe it.
Gotta believe it, totally.
So violence against women in pop culture has been a mainstay for years. It can still draw huge audiences. Do you think it's possible that this sort of usage of violence against women as a trope will eventually change, or is already changing, as the wider conversation about pushing back against victim blaming and rape culture sparked by Me Too keeps growing? Nisi?
Oh, sure, everything is going to change. I mean, it does feel like we're shouting into the wind sometimes, but there are a lot of us shouting. And as Dana was pointing out, sometimes we get heard. Also, we get to do some of the blowing, if you will, some of the wind. we get to actually, write shows and run shows and produce and direct. So as we, at first you're maybe doing this sort of thing, and you're, supporting the values with which you've been inculcated. You're going with the masculinist values, and then you realize, I could do something else. I could do what I really want to do. And I think that I'm 65 years old. I've seen things change. They do change.
Yeah. And speaking of female creators, I think it's very timely that you mentioned that, because Nia DaCosta has directed the first, I think someone said it's the first movie, Candyman, directed by a woman,
Yes.
black woman, that has hit #1 at the box office. So
yes.
Yeah, so it's and she put her own spin on the mythos of Candyman.
I'm very excited to see that. I'm
Oh
very
yeah.
excited to see that.
Okay, so back to the discussion. So Lee, what's your take on whether
Yeah, I
things
think
or
yeah,
not?
I think things are changing. I mean, they have to change, don't they? They have to. And I think you've hit the nail on the head entirely. It's about representation. It's about where we have people who can shape the narrative. So we need women publishers and women film directors and women newscasters and telling those stories and shaping the narrative in ways that are sensitive to these issues. And I see that myself in the publishing side, just being having the privilege of working with, for example, the Black Cranes contributors that we worked with when Southeast Asian writers writing horror, mostly women, one non-binary, and so and we were able to explore those particular perspectives and shape them accordingly. And there wasn't some bloke telling us how to do it. And I think that really resonated for people. There was this authenticity and power to it because these we gave rein to their own unique voices and perspectives. And I think that is exactly where the problem is. We need more representation. We need more voices, because, as you say, Nisi, so very clearly, is that we're all shouting, and if there's a lot of us shouting, eventually we might be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dana?
Yeah, this is so exciting to me because when I was growing up and I was starting to read a lot of fantasy, it was either Tolkien, and you're really you're looking for women or different points of view there, not a lot to be had, or you have things like the Sword and Sorcery where there's chainmail bikinis for miles, and you're like, okay, so am I the woman who stays at home and is loyal and keeps the home front going, or am I wearing a hideously inappropriate set of gear to go out and attack monsters without my hair? I mean, for heaven's sake, women, tie your hair up if you're going to go fight monsters, because it's just common sense. But now, if I wanted to, I'm so thrilled for young people these days who can go and say, oh, do I want to read about a female mage? Do I want to write? Do I want to read about a queer fighter character? Do I want to read about a whole bunch of druids, or who look like me or sound like me? And I love that. That is so exciting. And we were talking about nibbling away. That's the international sign for nibbling. Nibbling away at these things and our voices being heard. I remember, and as problematic as it is, I know that a lot of my friends, when their daughters were growing up, they would watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer with them. I bring that up again because it had made a huge impression on me. And they would talk about things, when their daughters and their sons were in high school, they would talk about these things like, well, what do you think was going on here? Or do you think so and so was right in doing that? So just the fact that they were able to have those things to talk about is huge.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's easy to get frustrated. It's so easy to get frustrated, but for that long distance point of view, there's so much more now. And the fact that I see younger people coming with their parents to book events because they read the same things and then they talk about it together, that's awesome. And so it's good to be reminded that sometimes we're the wind as well, and as well as the chorus of voices.
So the trope of female rage and revenge against violent men and misogyny is currently on the rise with movies such as Promising Young Woman. Do you think there's a similar trend emerging in speculative fiction books, Nisi?
The trend that I've actually seen most of in speculative fiction is more along the axis of race and ethnicity than along the lines of gender. But we've got this anthology now, so let's hope that this is the start of another wave. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, hopefully it does. I mean, I remember you commenting on it when we were, when we shared some posters, and there was a conversation. You said that this anthology that we have just released is a long time coming. It's a long
Yeah.
time coming. Yeah. Nisi, no, Lee.
Yeah, I've forgotten the question.
So the question is, the trope of female rage and revenge against violent men and misogyny is currently on the rise with movies such as Promising Young Woman. Do you think there's a similar trend emerging in speculative
In
fiction books?
speculative fiction. Well, yes, there is this book. Absolutely, there is this book. And yes, I think, well, and Black Cranes is another example where there's rage against the expectations placed on Asian women. So a similar sort of thing, and we talk about women as monster, and which is a common trope. I think, yeah, I think so. And I think, we've got some pioneers in the field. People like Carol Clover, just giving a name to it, that sort of final girl, giving a name to it gives us an opportunity to look at it and say what has been happening in the field and progress beyond that. I particularly like the opportunity to look at those cultural aspects. Nisi's story does this very clearly, looking at different ways that different cultures approach violence. And I know for myself, with looking at the Moon Goddess in my story for the Pixels project, my understanding, my personal understanding of violence against Asian women is Asian women don't say anything. We're even more socialized to keeping quiet than other cultures. There's a entire loss of face. You can be completely rejected from family. It is. So I was interested in investigating that, and I agree with Nisi when they say that the cultural aspects are becoming more prevalent in speculative fiction. Perhaps not the focus entirely on just women, but also those cultural aspects, which I think at that intersection of sort of culture and feminism, we have some really interesting opportunities to look at new ways forward and solutions, and that is kind of the role of speculative fiction, is it not? We're all, and also horror. It's a subversive genre, but it's also a progressive genre, and in that it asks, what if? How can we change things? What can we do differently? And if we go back to our original reference of Mary Shelley, I mean, the woman was amazing. She was writing about, resurrecting human bodies and life, with electricity in a time when, the electric arc light bulb was not even really invented yet. So she was just so revolutionary. So, writers have a huge role in thinking forward and looking at new ways and new metaphors for approaching this, and I think that's why it's such an exciting time.
And I would like to remind everybody that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein when she was just a teenager.
Oh, and speaking of the women as monster, there has been some recent scholarship saying that she modeled the Frankenstein's monster after her sister.
Oh,
who told people and wrote in letters, "I feel like I am a monster. I feel like I am this awkward, sewn together monster." So,
that's so fascinating.
Oh,
there's actually that's an interesting sort of segue, isn't it? Sorry, Regina, but there's also the woman in these stories that we're perhaps not considering, and that is the complicit sidekick, if you like, because when women have so little power in these situations, you'll often have another woman who is buying into that patriarchal, misogynistic, notion, because they have no power themselves. So they're just trying to get that little bit of power by stepping on some other woman or stepping on someone else. And we do see that in the literature, and so that is also something that is important to address when we're looking at authentic. speculative fiction is that complicit woman character who, and she exists in real life. I mean, we're all just trying to eke our way through life and make the best of possible world for ourselves. And so there are those characters that exist in real life who are complicit and who help perpetuate those patriarchal notions.
Yeah, and I just want to interject with some. You brought up something that I've been noticing on social media. So I joined a lot of feminist groups on Facebook, and there's a term for that now that they've used, which we can thank Margaret Atwood for. So
Yeah.
anytime we come across a woman who does what Lee just said, that upholds the strictures of patriarchy, everyone calls that woman a handmaid to the patriarchy. Oh, look, there's a handmaid to the patriarchy right there. So thank you, Margaret Atwood.
Yes.
I was going to bring up something that has been it's been kind of a revelation to me, was in terms of writing horror. I've just started focusing more on writing horror because, frankly, for a while now, it's been unbelievably easy to write
Come to
horror.
the dark side, Dana.
I was invited to write, because I started writing traditional mystery and then went to urban fantasy, and then Chris Golden asked me to write a horrific vampire story. I'm like, and I had the best time. Oh my God, it was so much fun. I was like, it was a lot of fun. But then I realized I've written a couple more since then, and I realized at one point I'm trying to figure out who's the monster in the story I was telling. It wasn't this the story for the Pixels, but it was another one that I'm sending out into the world, and it was such an amazing relief to me. It's like, oh wait, I'm the monster.
Yes.
I'm the one who's transgressing everything, so I might as well embrace that and go with it. And if they're going to tar me for being a monster, then I'm going to be a monster. I'm going to be monstrous. And that was the most liberating thing ever. And it just it clicked and turned my whole perspective around. And I really am grateful for horror for that, because it's like, well, if I'm the one who spoils all the parties with all these, like, well, that's not quite right, or going home to visit folks and saying, well, and being the one who's always pointing out the some masculinist fallacies, or then I might as well just embrace it and go to town, burn it all down.
So basically is they use they make the feminine monstrous as a way of shaming us. And so now we are gonna flip it around and go, well, okay, I'm the monster and I'm gonna take a big bite out of you.
And it's fun.
So we've already started touching on this, but let's talk about where storytelling and speculative fiction and reality intersect. So can examples of justice for women who have experienced sexism and violence against women in speculative fiction, help advance efforts for justice for women in real life? So let's go with Nisi.
This is hard for me because I really think that storytelling is important, and I really think that you can do more than preach to the choir. You can actually convert people by subverting what they think. But there's got to be more. There's just got to be more. I'm still reeling from the U.S. Supreme Court's decision yesterday. Talk about violence against women. Did they not read my stories? Have they never read Marge Piercy? Come on. The people who okayed the act of outlawing abortion at 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, when it could just be a problem with, like, you don't have enough iron or something. So those people, they need more than my stories. Sorry.
Okay. Before Lee answers, this question from the audience came out, which ties in with what you just said, Nisi. I hate to ask, but does anyone else believe that the changes in pop culture is causing the withdrawing of feminine rights in society? For example, Texas. What do you all
Uh,
think?
no.
I hope not. um,
Do you think
I
so?
think, I'm sorry. I think that is, I can see why someone would think that there is a connection there, but I think that when rights are denied to a particular group of people for whatever reason, it's because someone else is very afraid. And it could look like, oh my gosh, all these women are writing stories and they're, empowering the characters and such. But I really think that it's afraid that it's more um, it's more elemental than that. Someone's afraid something's going to be taken away from them. Um,
yeah.
and I think that's really the bigger thing. And the more afraid they are, the more they double down on it. That's just my immediate take on this very large social question.
Oh,
It's
okay.
huge.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, anyone? This reminds me of Chuck Wendig when he said, all these people raging around trying to take away everyone else's human rights are kind of like dinosaurs waving their little arms in the air. T-Rexes waving their little arms in the air as the asteroid of change comes hurtling
Yeah, well, I
towards.
think that's exactly right, isn't it? I mean, when you get a period of, rapid progression, then you are going to get people who are very afraid and who will kick back. And I think that seems to be what's happened here. I hope that they can knock that on the head because it's very scary to me. Very scary. But one of the things I think, Regina, when we're talking about, can it actually make a difference? Can writing about these issues within speculative fiction really help? And when I wrote my story, sadly, I had several people that I could send it to for a sensitivity issue. We all know people who've been abused and who have had violence perpetrated against them. And so I was able to send my story to a number of women to comment, sadly, and also some Asian women. But just talking about authenticity, I wanted to be sure that I was not misrepresenting and that my story was accurate in the way it was presented. And one of the things the comments that I got back was, yes, this is exactly how I felt. And there is value in writing a story where people can identify with the situation and feel heard, feel seen. It's very important to see yourself represented in fiction. And perhaps the fact that in these stories, the women who are abused escape, see some way out, are able to put the demon in his place and move forward, and perhaps that gives those people hope. And to me, that is a real preparedness. Perhaps there's an element of all of the women in these stories prepared. What am I going to do? Thought about it. How prepared. And there's that idea of fellowship. When you see yourself in a story, it's that sense of sharing. Even if you have no voice yourself, else is expressing it for you. So there's lots of value in that. And maybe we're not actually getting the legislation we need quite yet, or we're not getting all of the things that we want to see happen as fast as but at least we are speaking to those women who cannot speak. And and letting them know we're here and we're speaking for you, and we know you're there. That is a step. That's something.
Lee, I'm sort of reminded, and I may be completely misinterpreting this from your story. Was it the granddaughter of the moon? Was that it?
The moon goddess's granddaughter. That's right.
Granddaughter, that's it. And I was thinking about how I'm not giving anything away when the protagonist decides she's going to do something, and she's drawing on her power. It's the slender and yet terribly strong filaments of moonlight. which seems like it shouldn't be anything at all, but it's that one thing. It's that one thing that can change your whole outlook on something. When you make a decision, or you hear someone who hears you, and you realize that they hear what you're saying. It doesn't have to be a huge thing, but it's enough to put it out there. And that's sort of, I may be misinterpreting that, but that's the way it felt to me, looking at that.
That was the hope. That was the hope. You know, that moment when you actually gather up your power to yourself and take the steps you need to take to secure your own safety. And I think we do need to also look at the support people, the friends, the people, or in these stories, the supernatural elements which give you the power to move forward. And sometimes it may only be someone hearing you. That will, you know, someone hearing you may be the thing that makes you take that step. And if these stories do it for you, then I'm grateful for that. That's hugely empowering and wonderful. That would be wonderful. That would be a wonderful outcome for me.
It would be. Before we did, just to give some context, before we started doing the anthology, we had a series called Survivor Stories, which we opened to survivors of domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, and other forms of violence against women. Survivors who are already at a stage where they had escaped, they had gone through the entire process, and so they can share their stories publicly to perhaps give other victims and survivors who haven't left their abuser, who haven't been through those steps, some hope. And based on some of the feedback that we have received, it worked. It worked because suddenly, if you're being abused and you can't really put your finger on it, and then suddenly you're reading about someone else who's gone through the same thing. And then further down the interview, because we put this in interview form, further down the interview, that person talks about it step by step. Many of them talk about it. Okay, so I took this step, then I took that step. This is the thing I did, and this is how I got away. Suddenly, the light bulb just goes on. So hopefully, the stories in the anthology has the same effect. We might never know unless someone writes to us and lets us know, but hopefully it'll have the same effect. And so speaking about the way that the Pixel Project uses story, do you have any suggestions about how anti-violence against women activists and organizations can use speculative fiction to support or be part of their advocacy and activism for justice for women and girls? Nisi?
Well, you're doing it. I mean, but by using the stories as a way to raise attention and raise funds for direct action. Those are definitely ways that, those are the best ways, I think.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other suggestions?
Buy this book.
I was going to say, I was kind of hoping that at some point, and I'm not sure, you know, what grade level or what age this would be appropriate, but, you know, having a series of stories like this, or even other speculative fiction, to talk about these things with a group of young women and have them respond to it. And I think, you know, in a classroom or a group session, a group thing, I think that could be quite cool. Or even having them write their own superheroes, write their own, you know, supernatural character, and what that character does to help other young people. Because I think when you start to envision that, you don't think of it as being yourself, but you're finding your own way out, your own safety rope. When you envision your own protagonist, your own hero, your own heroine, you're giving yourself a script. You're giving yourself permission to think about things in a certain way. So I tend to think that have them do some of the writing or making up the stories about it.
I so applaud that. Thank you, Dana. That's a great idea to have them, like, there's nothing quite so converting as having someone internalize the values and then try and put them forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Do you
think
think? Do y'all think that it might work if we got boys to do the same thing?
Yes.
definitely, they might feel they might. I don't need to tell you, Regina, how young men tend to respond to some of these things. But it's like when you start spelling, as I know you've done with your students, as you start spelling out things like, well, is this something that you want to have happen in your life? What could you do about it? I think that would be. They probably all know that they have sisters or friends or parents who've been in abusive situations. They've probably seen things, or they've heard about it from popular culture, and I think it's in there for them to. It's in there whether they've experienced it personally or not. And so if you have the boys doing it as well, I think that's an incredibly useful thing, because then you can also check themselves when they're sort of, if they get drawn into like a group of guys behaving badly, they'll sort of like, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of contrary to what I was just writing about, or what I was just thinking, or how I want to be. So yeah, language changes the world. Language changes reality, and if you can get them to speak that language, then so much the better. If you get them thinking about the language that they use, so much the better. So
Yeah, words matter.
yeah.
It boils down to words matter. Um, so speaking of words, so let's talk about the nuts and bolts of storytelling for Justice for Women for speculative fiction authors who have decided to try their hand at incorporating violence against women in their stories. So, what are the particular pitfalls that writers who have never included these themes in their stories need to bear in mind if they're thinking of doing so? Nisi?
Oh gosh. This gets into the kind of territory that I'm trying to teach about. So I've seen people say that the best way to write about this kind of thing is just to remove all consideration in your head of the differences, and I don't think that works actually. There's like these two extremes that people do when they're writing about someone that is different in a certain way. And so if you're writing about someone who has experienced violence and you have not, you can go the way of like, they're just exactly like me, or they're just completely different from me. And I think that those are the two traps that you want to avoid. You can write from your own experience, and that brings a bunch of other cautions. But if you're writing about an experience that you don't have, you probably want to like develop your empathy gradually. And start with short passages and practice with short stories before you try anything massively difficult.
Okay, Lee?
Oh, yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? No violence just for the sake of violence. I don't think we need that. So any violence in a story needs to contribute to the story. Authenticity of characters, and I actually think this means the perpetrator of the violence as well, because I think when people who have a tendency to be violent read these stories, they don't see themselves there. They don't see themselves as that person. And so just even those little gestures towards violence, that put down, the exclusion, the isolation, those sorts of things can be triggers, and that those little cues are important, because they hopefully we'll see people realizing that they're doing these behaviors, the gaslighting, all of that kind of thing, so that they're aware that, oh, I said that, and that's that I need to dial that back. So maybe that's authenticity on both sides. So not just our victims, but also the perpetrators need to be very clearly drawn, so that people see themselves. Because I mean, I think we've all been, I know at times that maybe I've been complicit, and I might have contributed to something that's happened to someone else. So I think we all need to be, we just need to make sure those characters are very clearly drawn and authentic. Um, but it is tricky. Yeah, it is tricky. You're right. You're dead right, Nisi. We need to be careful about, not writing someone else's story, and making sure that those voices are accurate and relevant. It's tricky. It's a tricky one. And
It's one of the things I find problematic and gets down to, as you say, nuts and bolts, Regina, is that I often see a lot of these stories, and I get very leery of them, about revenge stories. And for me, the ideal or the worst example, if depending on how you look at it, is for me the girl with the dragon tattoo, because although the author was talking about how much against violence against women he was, and this, that, and the other thing, he rehashed the violence over and over and over again. And
Yep.
I wanted to be very careful to, in my story, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making that. I want to make sure that's not a meal. I was talking with my agent about this, about how tricky this is, and he's saying that people were coming up to him like, "Oh, I've got this great revenge story," and they'd send it along to him. And the first, the first third was a glorified meal of the abuse towards the women, or the female characters, and I think that's incredibly important to avoid. You can use the violence, use it sparingly, make sure that it is in the fitting the story or moving the story along. But you can also use other emotions besides. You can talk about pain and betrayal and love and fear and
shame.
And shame, and voicelessness. You can talk about all those things and bring that experience to life in different ways. I think that's key, because you don't want it to be sort of a thing for people to just be reading for gratuitous purposes.
And that's the trouble with certain TV shows and movies, right?
Yeah.
That it's all about the violence, but they never show the consequences.
Well, they never have consequences.
Yeah, they never show that.
Yeah.
There is even consequences. Yeah. Having said that, what are some of the techniques that speculative fiction authors can use to effectively turn toxic tropes that are rife with sexism, misogyny, and all violence against women on your head, and perhaps even use them to send a message to the reader that violence against women is never acceptable? Nisi?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning, I had read a book by Gwyneth Jones called The White Queen, in which an alien view of the literal, as far as they were concerned, battle of the sexes was helpful. So there's that. There's I just edited another anthology in which there was a story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, just an alternate universe in which men were being punished for masturbation, along the same lines of women being punished for abortions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this whole thing where you can flip genders, and there's changes in perspective. Those are just a couple that come to mind immediately as far as techniques in speculative fiction to highlight gender inequality and the innate violence.
Okay, Lee?
Yes, and I think that taking it out of context, as both Nisi and Dana have said before, taking it out of our real world context and placing characters in, a fantasy, some type of fantasy context provides that level of safety and distance where you can look at these issues from a distance and consider them in a sort of well, it is emotional, but less. I don't know what the word is, but just that little bit of distance just provides that opportunity to look at it with I don't know, fresh eyes, or I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's something about speculative fiction, because it's not real. There is that safety, and I mean, we can make these things happen. Even if it's seen in a fantasy context, we can make these things happen down the line. So Jules Verne, we didn't have a submarine that worked until, Jules Verne wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and then someone came along and made it. So I think that the fantasy context can be very valuable like that. And all of us have used it in our stories, that actually women need to empower themselves, but here's a helping hand. And so that the helpers are that the thing that triggers that empowerment is extremely important, and that might be a person, an organization, that might just be just a sense of confidence. It could be a fear of a child being injured. There's all of these opportunities which we can see in that speculative context that's separate from reality, that can give us that opportunity for progress.
Okay, Dana?
Yeah, I am. Nisi's already used all the good words as she has done so
Yes,
often.
she's so good at that, isn't she?
But yeah, definitely for me, it's flipping the script. I mean, that's why I find writing horror or writing alternate history or creating cultures that are unlike those we have on Earth to give you that perspective. I if you know me, that you know I'm somewhat obsessed with uh, uh, the historical Cleopatra, not the Cleopatra of Shakespeare and of let's say the cheap. I'm not interested in the cheap version, shall we say? And so I desperately, having read the fabulous biography, I can't remember who wrote it. So good. I actually woke my husband up. I said, look at these footnotes. These are genius. It was this academic geek out moment. But the book itself was fantastic, and it was so beautifully researched and contextualized. That's the thing, whether we create the context or we look at it in a different historical context, or if it's a galaxy far, far away, it gives you the chance to do that. So I think that's why I love when alternate history is done well. It can be so effective, because it's like, hey, people forget about the fact that she was a scholar and a warrior, and she could dance, and she spoke 7 languages, and she, commanded the Navy, and this kind of stuff. And I said, well, what happened if Julius Caesar stayed alive just a little bit longer? And what happened if she decided to take war to Rome? I'm like, I'm going to write that story, because
Yeah.
all of a sudden I start looking at, okay, I was drawing heavily from historical resources and just, taking a few factors, little facts here and there and playing with them, which is something you're not supposed to do as an archaeologist. And it's so much fun to do when you're a writer. But it's like, oh, let's draw our attention to these other things. So I think that's where the value is. If we just, tweak that perspective a little bit, it can be incredibly.
So you mean take the focus off the violence and the other qualities that a woman might have in those.
Yep.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point.
You could stop looking at the, what some, I guess, folks I grew up with might call the juicy bits, and let's look at the history, and let's look at the context of that, and what was statecraft about, what was military history
Yeah.
about, that sort of thing. So I think either historically or speculatively do that, play with that.
Can y'all share some tips and suggestions for portraying female characters who have experienced gender-based violence without reducing them to the sum of their trauma? Nisi?
Give them agency.
Yeah.
They can't just be like lying there and experiencing violence. They need to have just some agenda of their own. And it doesn't always have to be revenge. It can be, they can have another mission, which this is perhaps it's a sort of obstacle, but it's not devastating. That's my tip.
Lee?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
I realized that one of the ways that you can take an experience like gender-based abuse is to not focus on that, but say, okay, this is the reason that character will never do X, Y, and Z. It doesn't have to, you don't have to focus on the act of violence itself, but you can say, or the character feeling victimized by it, but you can say, okay, this is what I experienced, and this is why I will never do this, I will never do that, I will always do this. And you can give them the agency, but also the vehemence, the passion that comes with determining to not take the road that someone else took, or to be aware of it, or to do more of the right thing. I think there are. It's sort of the choice to be active about how to do things, as opposed to in a character versus having it just affect them. So it's agency, but yeah.
Yeah, it's agency layered on backstory and culture and socialization,
Yep.
and the motivations of the character in the whole story arc. Is that what you're getting at? I'm just trying to interpret, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just the notion that say in an academic situation, let's just say there were things that happened, and I would go on, I'm like, when I'm a professor, I am never ever going to do this to my students. I'm never going to belittle them. I will not make fun of them. I will not do X, Y, and Z. And I will think about this when I'm talking to someone who is younger than me and doesn't know these things, and I'm not going to make fun of them because they're young and they don't know things and they're here to learn. And you have these things embellished in giant, flowing calligraphy in your psyche. It's like, okay, these things I saw happen. I'm not going to perpetuate that. So that's just, you have enough bad professors. You learn by that example how not to be a bad professor, or at least you know that you want to work towards that sort of thing, towards that goal.
So there's personal values, there's personal tenets that you don't step outside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know, maybe it does. It's Friday night. I'm very tired.
So how can speculative fiction authors engage with the issue of violence against women in their stories and explore justice for victims without sounding preachy? Now, this is the thing that we hear from a lot of people, or at least I hear when I'm in science fiction and fantasy groups, and the biggest complainers are men, actually.
Who would have thought?
We don't want message fiction. And I'm gonna quote Ken Liu here. He said, basically paraphrasing, he's basically paraphrasing. Ken said, well, too bad. All fiction is message fiction. And the difference is whether you as an author want to take control of the message, or if you just want your subconscious to leak through. That's what he said. I mean, what do you think, Nisi?
Oh, bless you, Ken. Yeah, no, I actually, I just had another story published, and I've had one review so far in which the reader was upset because I made them feel uncomfortable. I'm like, hey, not my job to make you feel comfortable. Sorry
I'm
about
sorry.
that. You know,
I'm laughing in
yeah.
recognition. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing. Yeah.
But no, it is funny because I that was not my intention to make them comfortable at all. At all. So I don't know, but preachy to me does have something in it that I want to avoid. It's not that I don't want to have political content or philosophical content. I just want that to be integral to the story, integral enough that it seeps into the consciousness and the unconsciousness of the reader. And I think that that's what you want to avoid, is that distance between your message and what's actually going on in the story, at the level of word by word. Are you calling these things huts, or are you calling them houses? uh, at the level of the action, at the level of the character descriptions, all of it, it all should be part of what you're trying to get across. But of course you're trying to get something across.
I think that's hysterically funny. It's like science fiction's about rocket ships. It doesn't have a deeper meaning. It's like, well,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've done your job if you entertain, and if you learn something while you're being entertained, then that's good. That's the point, isn't it? And I think this is all about story crafting, isn't it? And not clobbering your reader over the head with your message, and I mean, and pushing that subtly into your story, as Nisi says, through vocabulary and the turn of phrase, and the actual story arc you use, and the format of the story, and all of those kinds of things. They're just the nuts and bolts of how you tell a story. The trick is to entertain and engage your reader, so that they get the message as part of the experience of reading your story, without actually feeling like you've set out to teach them a lesson. But I do wonder if the problem is the person reading. I mean, every reader brings their own experience to a story, do they not? And so if you're reading something and deciding that it's preachy, perhaps the problem is not the story.
maybe you're hearing too much truth that you are not familiar with. Yeah.
Or maybe it's like setting off your inner preach. Or
I wish more people had an inner preach.
Cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Because we see Star Trek fans and all sorts of fans of progressive entertainment with progressive values and messages, start doing things that start bullying other people, start being nasty. And you're like, what have you say you're a Star Trek fan, and you're preaching racism, you're being sexist. It's like cognitive dissonance. It's like the entertainment value, the entertainment that they get from the stories, just the message doesn't seem to have sunk in. I don't know if you find this, but I found that in many fandoms.
It was funny. It's like, wait, girls can't drive spaceships. I'm like, wait,
Until they can.
Let's start with spaceship first, and let's talk about the unrealistic. Let's talk about whatever. It's just really hysterically funny to me, that level of blindness, which But I was thinking, Nisi, it was so funny when I was reading your story. I was thinking, this really feels like a Victorian adventure. And then I got to the end where you're talking about drawing on Louisa May Alcott and her very like a long fatal love chase, and the very exciting and sensational thing. And I think that's it. It's like, you can be talking about things like violence toward women. You can talk about things about imperialism or racism, but if it's an adventure as well, then that's the sort of the candy coating, if you will, on the message that everyone seems so unwanting to have or unwilling to have. But I think if it's Lee, you were saying the same thing. It's the craft of it. But if you're casting it as an adventure, then you're paying attention to these things and you're empathizing with the protagonist. But you're also figuring, how do you get out? How do you get out? What would I do?
What if?
Yeah, what if? And I think that's the thing. And so I was like, gosh, this feels very Victorian to me. So I was really pleased that I got it. And you communicated it very brilliantly, I should say. And
it's a beautiful story. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous story. I loved it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. It was fun to write. I'll tell you that.
What can speculative fiction teach other fiction genres about writing about violence against women, sexism, and misogyny in stories? Nisi?
I think that the thing that speculative fiction can teach the other genres is that it doesn't have to be the way it is. I mean, that it's right in the name, right? Speculative. You're speculating about what could it be a different way, and you're certainly free to do that in this genre, and that's what it can teach the other genres, is that they don't have to go with the received wisdom of what's happening. The historical fiction, for instance, you don't necessarily have to go with our current version of the most popular version of a history. You can get the actual history.
I know. It's so funny because I have often heard people complain. It's like, well, why are you going to be studying women intellectuals and women artists? They never did anything. Like, have you gone looking for it? If you don't look for it, it's not going to be there. If you don't think about it, it's not going to be there. So, and all of a sudden you start looking for these things and you find out all these fantastically creative and inventive people who happen to be wearing skirts most of the time, all sort of tucked away in all sorts of corners. And it's once you start looking for it, once you start thinking it's possible, oh, hey, maybe it's not so far from what we're speculating about in the first place. But that's the thing, is like, well, I could get into a big long thing about teaching history and how one knows history and how, but I'm not going to, because it's not that class, it's not that lecture.
I kind of think speculative is the new black, right? It's like it's the new literary fiction, because it's the place where we're addressing all the things that matter, climate change and feminism and geopolitical issues and everything, and we address everything in speculative fiction. It is forward thinking. Oops, I've got a little bit of a feedback loop now, but I mean, I think if anyone had been reading zombie fiction, for example, in the last few years, we would have known exactly what to expect when we went into a pandemic. And I say this a lot, so there's a place for speculative fiction, not only for sort of looking at new technologies, new world orders, new society, ways to structure society. And, we're coming out of a pandemic, or we're hopefully coming out of a pandemic. We're looking at all the ways that has exacerbated, the current world order and the way that the society operates. And so speculative fiction, to me, is the place to look at all these things in a way that entertains, engages across such a broad spectrum of our community. I mean, we've got young people reading it, we've got older people, everyone is, it's so accessible for everyone. And this is what I think is, and storytelling doesn't have to be, in a book. It can be oral. The stories that, we make up and we tell to our children on our knees, that's the value. Speculative to me is the only place to be. It is the new fiction. And I was at a conference last year, and Laura Jean Mackay, who's I think she's on the Arthur C. Clarke shortlist this year with her Animals book, Speculative Fiction, and she said to me, it was really interesting. She said at this conference, and we asked her about, speculative, because her book was originally marketed as literary, and she said, I think that literary is nostalgic, and I thought that was just an fabulous way to look at it, because all fiction is literary fiction. All fiction is literature, and speculative fiction is literature, but literary fiction, as we know, that particular genre tends to be more nostalgic. You're looking back, whereas speculative fiction is looking forward, and that is a way. Even in alternate history is looking forward. If you're looking at a new way of looking at history, and I think that is the place we need to be, because that is the place where we can look for new solutions and ways of restructuring the world, society, technology, all of those things to create a better place for all of us.
Yeah.
All right.
It's so funny. I'm just going to really quickly, you reminded me when you're talking about Jules Verne and the submarines. I remember reading Michio Kaku, the physicist, was talking about the fact that he was inspired to go into physics watching science fiction shows and movies and such. Folks who are in the space program got inspiration from watching these things. People who it's almost as if, the fact that we had flip phones is directly, again, from the original Star Trek. It's from so you're inspiring people to aspire to something better, something different, to look at the world a little bit differently.
And it really does work, because if I think about Maori Indigenous narratives, for example, not specifically about violence, but if we're talking about new Maori narratives, there's a real notion of land as ancestor. Okay, so who the land nurtures us. It is our ancestor. We live on it, and it looks after it, protects us, provides us nourishment, all of those things. And as a result of that kind of attitude, that cultural value that exists here in New Zealand, in 2014, I believe, we brought out a new act which protects the Urewera National Forest as its own entity, as a person, as a taonga or a treasure. It's the world first. So now that particular, born of a speculative story or a piece of storytelling from our culture, we now can protect that beautiful national forest as its own entity. It's a person. You must protect it in the same way. So that is a climate change positive, a success that is now, a legal entity in its own. So that just shows the power of speculative fiction. So go Texas, you can do it. You can turn this on its head, and walk back that war against women. It can be done. So speculative fiction is the way forward. I totally believe it. That is my word for the day.
So we've come to the final question of the panel, which is a fun one. So, what science fiction, fantasy, or horror books would you recommend that aspiring writers read to see good examples of violence against women and girls being handled well? Well, not just aspiring writers, but everybody. Nisi?
I'm sorry I didn't come up with a list, but I do have to say, again, for the third time, The White Queen, Gwyneth Jones, because it is so mind-blowing in how it deals with that. Yeah, I'll stop there. If I may add some after you folks go.
Lee?
Well, I'm actually going to just give a shout out to poet Christina Singh, a double Bram Stoker award-winning poet, who has some poems coming out well, here I am, I'm doing my promo now. I have a collection coming out with Christina, Angela Yuriko Smith, who's also in the Pixels project, and Genevieve Flynn, my co-editor from Black Crane's Tales of Unquiet Women, but particularly Christina Singh's poems, because she's written a series of poems which focus particularly on violence against Asian women, and that, and ways of looking forward. So in a series of speculative poetry and horror poetry, which I think is another fresh way to look at this issue. So I'd like to give her a shout out. And I know she has done some of that work already in her collection of nightmares, dreamscapes. She's got 2 books like that. Both of her books are, poetry books that look narratives looking at some of those issues. So definitely worth looking at. But yeah, there's a growing. I didn't write a list either, so that's very poor of me. But there is a growing list of very good work being done in this area.
That would be a very cool thing for the Pixel Project to start curating as a list of authors.
Oh, we do.
Yes.
We have for the last 10 years. I'll send you all the links, but
cool, yeah.
I'm not sure whether you know this, but so this book has 16 authors, 16 stories, because it's in homage to the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Mm-hmm. So one of the programs that we do, and everyone here, just let everyone who's watching this know, is we do an annual sort of blog listicle campaign, as in it's called 16 for 16. And we hold it in tandem with the 16 days of activism. And every article in that, we publish an article a day, and every article in that series contains either 16 role models or activists, or 16 books, or 16 suggestions of what to do for, say, female genital mutilation, or 16 ways that we have one where 16 ways that the media, 16 tips for the media to report violence against women correctly and authentically, for example. And one of our annual articles for that in that campaign is, 16 books that we would recommend that you read that treat violence against women well. I mean, they handle the issue well, and we've been doing it for 10 years, so it's about 160 books now.
Nice.
Is Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson on there?
No, but we can add it. Yeah, compiling it now.
That's my other pick is Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson, which deals with violence against women, sexual abuse against women. It's a strong, resilient female at the center of it, who has her own agenda.
I have a couple of books that I immediately came to mind. One was actually a comic book called Bitch Planet.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Kelly Sue DeConnick, and it is amazing because it deals with women who are, according to the patriarchal society, non-compliant, and so they're all put on this prison planet. But you hear their stories inside, and it's mind-bogglingly good. It's fantastic. My husband understands that if I ever meet Kelly Sue DeConnick, I'm going to follow her, devote my fealty to her, and walk the earth. I was also thinking of Hilary Monahan's The Hollow Girl.
Oh yeah.
Which it deals with. It's a YA book. It's very, very beautifully and carefully written, and it's about a rape, but how a Welsh Roma community deals with it, and it's really an incredibly. It's very powerful. It's very emotional, and it's beautifully done. And the other thing, and it's a little bit off. I guess maybe. Well, I don't know. I think I'll throw it out there. Is Naomi Novik's retelling of fairy tales? I was thinking of Spinning Silver. And Uprooted, because it takes a lot of negative ideas, puts them in historical context, and and puts women at the center of it. So those are, but I have to say, I always recommend Bitch Planet just because it is so beautifully. The first few pages when it's like set up, you see from the patriarchal side of the world, and it's very glossy and it's very showy. But then you start seeing the prison world, and it's the color changes, the art changes. It's amazing. So
Yeah.
There are women who have tattooed themselves as non-compliant.
yeah, I've only gone so far as the T-shirt, which I wear regularly. But I have a friend who has a non-compliant an NC tattoo. So I think it's fabulous. So, but
I love a shout out to Evie Knight, the Fourth Whore, which is a book that won the first novel Bram Stoker this last year, and that was written in response to her own experience of violence. A horrific story, but so that's also a wonderful one. It's very confronting, so a bit of a trigger warning there, but powerful stuff, really powerful stuff.
Yeah, and to round things up, we have a couple of recommendations on our end. I mentioned this earlier, which is Anne Bishop's The Courtyard of the Others. It's a 5-book series. It's complete, and it treats everything from it's astonishing the way that Anne Bishop treats the issue of domestic violence, of self-harm, so trigger warning for self-harm, of rape, and it's very powerful. And as the head of an anti-violence against women organization, I can really recommend it as an example of how to do it properly, how to write about it properly. The other one that we would recommend is Read for Pixels alumna Faith Hunter. Her series Soulwood, the main protagonist is someone who survived a cult in Tennessee, and the Christian cult in Tennessee, which has subjugating women, including raping young girls as part of their cultural practices. So the story looks at the aftermath of that, how she deals with it, how she rebuilds her life. It's an easy read, and as far as it goes, because it's also urban fantasy, but it also deals with all these. Basically, what Faith has done is she shows consequences, and she shows how the central protagonist deals with it, and it keeps popping back up in her life. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. If you haven't been abused, is that like you get PTSD. If your abuser is still alive, there's always a chance of him popping back up in your life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's legally enforced, like the courts making women who have been raped and gotten pregnant share custody with their rapists. So this is something that the book deals with, the series deals with as well. So those are our 2 recommendations. So anyone else have any recommendations before we start wrapping up? No? All right, so let's start the wrap up. So if you've joined us and you haven't heard of Giving the Devil His Due, which is our new charity anthology that's just come out on September 1st, let's share a little bit more with you about it. So hold on. All right, hang on. The slide is taking a while to come up. All right, here we go. So can everyone see this?
yay!
Yeah.
Yay! So if you're interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due, you can order it from all major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women work alive, including Read for Pixels, which is the program that this belongs to. And additionally, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer a special anthology book plate for early bird buyers. So each author will sign 16 book plates, and it'll be first come, first served, as only each buyer can only have one book plate. And each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. And for more information about the anthology and how to score one of these exclusive book plates, visit bit.ly/giving the devil his due. It is case sensitive, so please take it down exactly. And Anusha is also posting the link in the chat box right now, so you can just click on it. And if a heritage anthology is not your cup of tea, we are also currently running our Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has plenty of other goodies available this week from authors and or publishers from genres as diverse as romance, mystery, young adult, and of course science fiction and fantasy. So you can donate to get these goodies via Rally Up at bit.ly/R4P Rally Up 2021. And you can find out more about the Read for Pixels program at bit.ly/Read for Pixels. And to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. And now for announcement time. So let's start with Nisi. What do you have coming up in the next 3 months?
So I'll be teaching a writing class at Hugo House. And when I say at, I mean online. Because it will be available to multiple time zones that way. So it's called Year Long in Science Fiction. And it's all about how to write and how to improve your writing. I define science fiction rather broadly. So science fiction, horror, fantasy. We'll be doing some critiquing and some lecturing and some exercises. And then the other thing is the day before this anthology came out, a short story of mine came out as a standalone ebook. It's called 2043, A Merman I Should Turn to Be. And it is a depressing aquatic future, according to my one reviewer. And uncomfortable.
Lee?
I'm absolutely thrilled to announce that my first poetry collection, Tortured Willows, with Christina Singh, Angela Yuriko Smith, and Genevieve Flynn, is coming out on October the 7th. So, fabulously excited. It's an extension of the discussion of Black Crane's Tales of Unquiet Women, but in poetry format. So I can't tell you how excited I am about it. I've read most of the poems that are in it now, and wow, they've just blown me away. So not my ones, the other ones. I'm supposed to be in a residency, the Grimshaw Sargent Residency for poetry, writing about the fox spirit, and using the lens of the fox spirit of Asian mythology to look at the New Zealand women, Chinese women's diaspora here, and fascinating. I've just been doing the research, and just some horrific things perpetrated against women, and responses of women in New Zealand due to their isolation and other aspects. So very excited about that. But unfortunately, we're in lockdown, so I've had to come home from the residency, and so I'm not sure when I'll get back there. It will depend when Auckland comes out of lockdown. But the really big thing that I'm most excited about is in 3 weeks' time, my daughter gets married. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the COVID will allow that. So that's our big project on at the moment. And along with some short stories and bits and pieces. Mostly I just need to get the house sorted in case a whole lot of guests descend upon us. I'm so out of practice with this whole COVID thing. No one comes anymore, and so I don't know how to be a hostess anymore. So that will be a new experience for me in the last couple of years.
All right,
I've totally turned into a feral cat myself. It's like what excited me recently is I put together all the Fangborn books in all the Fangborn short stories with a new one because they've been published in anthologies and in magazines and such, and so they needed to be all in one place. And I just want to point out this gorgeous cover art was written by Eric Nunley, who also was designed by Eric Nunley, who also has a short story in the selection. And to celebrate that, I did a series of online discussions, one with Charlene Harris and Tony Kellner on urban fantasy, one with Paul Tremblay and Rebecca McLeod on writing violence, one with Laurie King and S.J. Roseanne and Naomi Hirahara on writing historical fiction. So they're all on YouTube, and I hope you'll get the book when you're getting your copy of Giving the Devil His Due and check out the videos. And I'm still recovering from that, I'm in my office, I'm working. That's what everyone's doing these days. It's like, yep, here is the cat. I'm in my office. Carry on. So that's it for me right now.
Okay. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll all bid you all a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.
Thank you for having us. Nice to chat with you all.